security. Security is not usually network issues.
I can really block out everybody's face this way. All right, welcome to Philly.net HandsOn Lab series. This is our in the heat of summer and with all the humiditties. But we're going to do something really interesting tonight. We're going to talk about a new experimental technology from Microsoft called Blazor. Blazor is a Microsoft implementation of something called WebAssembly. And I'm going to spend the first 15 minutes or so just sort of level setting and explaining what the concept here is. And then all the hands-on is going to be driven by Chris Gomez, which he should be up here in about 20 minutes or so. And he's got a lot planned for you to go through. Before we do that, let me talk a little bit about some club business. So we still use the Meetup thing. And in Meetup, you look here, and you see the current meeting. I see that as of yesterday, we had about 120 people signed up. So people are behaving very well. If you're not going to come, you really want to cancel that registration so that we know how much catering and things to buy. So that system's working okay. If you want to see upcoming meetings, then you see on the lower right-hand corner, we have a meeting here in 2 weeks, and that is going to be a presentation on Azure serverless programming using Azure bots. Our own Rich Ross from Microsoft is going to do part of that presentation, and then Andy Schwam is going to do the other part. That meeting is held in conjunction with the Philadelphia Azure user group. And everybody turn around and sort of look nasty at Rich Ross, who still has not submitted his description of his talk. Hi, Rich.
Oh, okay.
Just wanted to bring that up. All right. So the other thing you can do here is if we go to see all the upcoming meetings, you will see that we have the Azure bots, and then we have a meeting starting, or a monthly meeting in September, where we're going to do unit testing, and then also there's a guy coming from out of town who helped to write no-op commerce. So that should be an interesting presentation. You don't see any others here. However, we are going to start in the beginning of September. Our lab series is going to spend 4 months working with GitHub. So do you have some kind of agenda, Rob?
Yeah, we're just going to start with installing, getting it running locally on your own machine, and then going from there to...
So we're going to concentrate on Git.
Git first.
Then GitHub.
Then GitHub. And then utilities that you can use to make it all work.
Okay, and somewhere along the line, we're going to show you how to work with markdown files and all sorts of fun things. So that should be an interesting adventure. So that'll take us through the balance of this year. The other thing you should be aware of, even though it's been announced, but I don't have it listed here yet, we have decided to do another code camp this year. So the dates of that are November 16th and 17th, I believe. It was in the last big email blast that I did. That was about a month ago. And that should be a Friday and Saturday, and same format we've had in the past. Friday will be full-day hands-on sessions. You pay to go to those, a modest $76. And then Saturday is standard code camp style, where we have 5 time slots and 10 rooms, and you move all over the building. So you will see details soon, and early in September we'll start promoting that and give you some details on exactly how you can set up. If you know people that would speak at CodeCamp, it would be wonderful if you could start pestering them, because the call for speakers is open. And So that's that would be useful. Now, the other local event, there's two other things you should know about, and I did not. I'm still trying to get used to this. This is the new Chrome look and feel. If you don't have this yet, see how my search is rounded? Ooh, my tabs are rounded. Ooh, and you hit the plus over here instead of hitting the little thing on the right. Isn't that exciting? It's the little things that make one. So people should be aware of the .NET Conf. And if I could actually find it, there it is. Okay, there's a URL that you might be proud of. So that is in 1 month. And the person who organizes this is Jeff Fritz, of course, who's local to Philadelphia. And he is really putting together a really jam-packed agenda. It's going to last 24 hours, and there are speakers from all over the world in different time zones. So if you really want to ignore your friends, family, and coworkers, this is the place to be in mid-September. And we have one other announcement. Go on up.
Hi, everyone. My name is Joe Camerly. I'm one of the organizers of the Tech Bash conference. So my name is Joe Camerly. I'm one of the organizers of the Tech Bash conference. We're a community organized technical conference at the Kalahari Water Park in Mount Pocono, Pennsylvania. I have postcards here as reminders. We are the first week of October. We've got a great lineup of speakers. In addition, we're doing game night, family activities on Friday. We encourage you to come bring your family, stay at the water park, have a great time, see lots of great technical content, and I have codes for $40 off the admission.
Ooh.
So if you...
How many are going to Tech Bash? Well, there's two.
I have two. Well, if anyone is interested, it's very economical too.
Everybody take a coupon just to make him feel better. Come on.
I'll pass them
He'll pass them around, yeah, so worthwhile. You get to see me speak, and Rich Ross will be there doing recordings.
Yes.
Anyone who wants one, put your hand up.
Oh, just give them to everybody. Then they'll feel obliged to take it home. And
Okay.
come on, we want to do push marketing. All right, everybody should be on the internet already. If you're not already on, the code is listed on the board up here. Today's code is MS Event 932QD. And you put that in as an event code when you connect to MSFT Guest. So, on today's meeting, notice there were very limited set of instructions. Let's go. Everybody should be doing this. It's time for hands-on. No more futzing around. Okay. So basically, I'm only going to do about 15-minute, just a little lecture format, and then all the hands-on stuff will be Chris Gomez. So you'll see that Chris wrote some very explicit lab instructions, and they are at this link here. And he also made a bit.ly code if you want to type in fewer characters. But since I put them into the meetup, all you need to do is click on this. And if you click on this, you will then get that page. So this is the Philly.net GitHub account. And we post code samples and instructions and things here. So in a few minutes, you're going to be going through some of the information here, and if you do not have all the things installed you need, and the things include Visual Studio 15.7 of 2017, and then you need to have a certain version of the .NET Core SDK, you need to have the Blazor language service extension, and that helps with the Intellisense and things like that. Those are the three things that you need to get going. And then finally, you're going to be using this thing here to add a new template. The template will get you set up. Now, the reason Chris is using Visual Studio is that this is all experimental technology for Microsoft, and they haven't added all of the functionality to Visual Studio Code, which we usually use for these labs. So that's why he has asked that you all try and get those prerequisites set up before you get started. So if you want to ignore me and then just try and get this part done, that would be useful. If you've already gotten this done, then you can listen to me and be wowed and amazed. So if we want to learn new technology, where do we all start?
Here.
The Bible of Truth,
Google.
Wikipedia. Okay, so Wikipedia knows everything. And if we go there, they got a whole thing on WA. And how many actually use WebAssembly on a daily basis? Anybody?
I think so.
All right, well, that's why you're here. We're going to try and see if this actually makes any sense to us. How many of you make website front ends? Okay, so you love JavaScript stuff now. How many use Angular? React? Vue? I'm still the only one doing that. Okay. So a lot of you are now into the single page application or SPAs. So we've all learned how to do that. And when you do that, typically you use some kind of add-on to Angular or React that allows you to call a back-end API. Okay, well, if you do that, like me, you probably write your APIs in something like ASP.NET, because I make my APIs in ASP.NET Core using CSharp. Okay, and wouldn't it be interesting if we could actually write the back end and the front end both in CSharp? And that's the whole point of today's exercise. So how does that come to be? Well, a couple years ago, God created this thing called WebAssembly. And he brought together a working group. He actually is part of the W3C. Okay. And he brought together a working group, and I think they started around 2015. And they started coming up with ideas. How can we actually make other languages work inside the browser? For that to happen, either the browser has to do its own compilation, or somehow it has to read bytecode information, because that's what languages like C# or C++ or Java would actually generate. So what they did is they came up with this way of having executable code inside web pages. And to make that work, the browser must accept this new file format. And the file format typically is called WASM. I think it told you that somewhere here, but yeah, there you go. It's WAT or WASM. So basically, you take your code that you want to write your website, and you sort of compile it into this thing called WASM, and then it goes down to the browser. The browser can load that directly in, parse it, and actually run the instructions in it. Now, theoretically, and they've shown very good progress with this, theoretically, WASM can run much faster than JavaScript. So for certain types of applications that are very processor intensive, like doing graphing or doing games, this has a lot of value. Now, once they have figured out the format of the bytecode that's accepted by the browser, then they publish that to the various browser makers. And each of the browser makers move at their own pace. And I'm going to show you in a few minutes how you know whether your browser is supported or not. Okay? And basically, what? I don't want to work in Virginia. Stop it. Go away. Thank you. Okay. So, anyways, so all the major browsers, all the major modern browsers are now supported as of a few months ago. So the first time you actually saw some of this where you could use it was less than a year ago. It's that new. That's why nobody in this room is really using this yet. So it's not at a point where a corporate enterprise would adopt this as their main delivery platform for new applications. But it looks very promising, and I would think within a year, this is going to become a big thing. So that's why we're having a lab on it. We think you should learn it. So you'll notice they mention here that there are languages like Rust. I've never used Rust. Then .NET languages and things like that that are slowly being supported. So where do we go from here? Well, I asked you to open up the pages that Chris created. And I'm going to take you on a real quick spin here. In addition to the README, I want you to click on the info.md file. MD stands for Markdown. Okay? And basically, what I did is I just made a couple links for you to click on. And there's nothing to go wrong here. You just click on the first one and say, well, does Microsoft Edge support this? Well, everybody knows that Edge is now the browser in Windows 10. How many of you actually use Edge as your primary browser? Okay, gotcha. Anyways, it's now supported, and it actually shows you here WebAssembly, the MVP. What does that stand for? You're not allowed to answer.
I'm sorry.
Minimal viable product. Okay, has nothing to do with most valuable professional. But basically, it says here it is now supported on Edge, both for Xbox, mixed reality, and for some reason they say mobile, so you can actually run Edge on your Android phone. How about that? And of course, for all of you that live in a corporate America, the middle line here is the problem. Not supported in Internet Explorer 11. Okay, go back. And if we do one or two back buttons, it should take us back to our links. Now, this is one of the most important websites you should ever know. How many of you use the website Can I Use? Okay, everybody should know about this. If you ever sit in a meeting with a client or at your corporation and people are talking about different ideas, look stuff up here and tell them what's really going on. So what happens here, if I look up WebAssembly, it says, if it's green, it means my browser supports it. So Chrome, Safari is the one on Apple, Firefox and Edge all support it as of these versions. That's good. Now you look for this number in the upper right-hand corner. It says globally, this covers 75.32% of all browsers in the galaxy. Okay. Did you know they have other buttons here? Click on usage relative. Aha! That tells a story. That means that all the green stuff are browsers that you can actually connect to web and get WebAssembly to run. And it runs basically the same in all browsers because it's a W3 standard. Okay?
What do the numbers represent?
Percentages. So now you have to understand that this is all browsers globally, which right now predominantly mobile phones, not desktops. If you think desktops and you think corporate America, you might be stuck in this little corner down here. If you're at Internet Explorer 10, God help you. Okay, let's do date relative. I like this one. I love when they do fancy charts. So this shows you when the thing was supported. And it says, aha, Chrome was like the first one that released this, and that was in March of 2017. And right around that same time, Firefox released a working version. Prior to that, they had limited support. You see these little like green flags. But you can see here that as of October of 2017, which is a little less than a year ago, all the major browsers did support it, and now basically they all support it at this time. So this is a good resource called Can I Use? Okay. Now my next link, if you do some backspaces, my next link is the official working group site. So there is a WebAssembly.org, and they basically define what they're trying to do here. You're welcome to read all this on your spare time. You will notice that you call WebAssembly WASM. A lot of people use that term. And the thing I like here is they have a little roadmap. And the roadmap sort of says, this is where we're going with this. And basically, it shows you the milestones. It says, hey, we started working on this in 2015. It wasn't until March that we actually got to a point where people could start baking it into their browsers. The next thing they're going to do in this that does apply to us, because we're primarily C# focused, right now, this does not do garbage collection. So you'd have to say, well, you know, .NET's always had that. Well, you can't work on this yet. So, you know, you have to keep things within limits, but that is something that they're going to be adding to this soon. Okay, so I'm going to back it out here, the latest docs. So there is a website where you go to Mozilla, and they actually have all of the details. If you want to understand how they actually wrote the bytecode and how the compiler actually turns things into the bytecode, you're welcome to do this. This is sort of like low-level understanding of you know, all the technical nuances. I'm going to back out of this one. Now, we talk about the Microsoft side of the house. So they have some really bright guys at Microsoft that they have acquired. One is Miguel de Casa, and what did he invent?
Steve Sanderson.
Hmm?
Steve Sanderson?
No.
He's not.
No, he is the guy responsible for two things, Mono and Xamarin. So Xamarin is a popular way to create UIs using sort of an XML markup kind of thing. It's a neat way to program. But underlying that is this thing called Mono. So he is famous from a few years ago because he made .NET work on Linux. That's what Mono is. Well, he knows how to take .NET and make it sort of compile and run on other operating systems. So the real magic here started with his group, who made it so that C# could basically compile into something that Mono understands. And Mono can then turn it into something that the browser understands, what's called a WASM. So there's some tie in there. There's another famous guy, and that had already been mentioned, who invented this framework many years ago called Knockout.js. And then he became a Microsoft employee. His name is Steve Sanderson. And he is was very instrumental in the architecture of the Azure portal. The whole thing is sort of written using Knockout-type framework information. Okay, well then he was then put into the research position of figuring out how to get ASP.NET in C# to write to a format that WASM can understand. So what they came up with is this thing called Blazor. So let's click on that, the latest Blazor release. Okay, and this is a blog, and Steve Sanderson does a lot of the research. The guy that sort of manages the project looks like that. That's Daniel Roth. And he takes what they come up with, he guides the team, and then sort of publishes milestones and things like that. So they just came out with Blazor 0.5. And I'll show you in a moment, but it is an experimental project. And what's really awesome is they have a new thing called server-side Blazor. You guys haven't even used client-side yet. You're going to do that today. But now they have server-side. Now that's interesting. The difference is write what you're going to do today. You're going to write C# that actually runs on the browser, and then it plays and creates HTML and CSS to display a web page. In server-side Blazor, most of your code can actually run on the server. Then it has to send anything that changes, like the data or the markup. It actually can send to the client very, very tiny pieces, very fast. Okay. And what technology would we use to actually communicate between a server and a client?
The internet.
Did you come to our last lab? Wise ass. Signal R, yes. So it's going to actually use Signal R to broadcast the information down to the clients. So that sort of ties all the Microsoft pieces together, which is the job of this group, is how can we take all the cool ASP.NET Core technology and make it fit into this model. All right. So there's a lot of cool stuff you can do. Please read that. But there is an official home of Blazor, and that has a website. And that, see, it says build a web UI with C#. And so they have a nice set of documentation here. It explains all the stuff you need to know. So there's an API, there's a bunch of community links, there's a blog, and all that nonsense. So that's a good thing for you to read. Then if you want to actually see, since Microsoft does everything open source today, if you go to the GitHub repository, you can actually see the bits that the team is creating to make all this work. So, and you can actually do pull requests and things if you have an idea to make it better. I would suggest you first learn how to use it before you start doing pull requests. But anyways, it's all up there for you to look at and understand how they're working. And the last thing I'll show you is there's a really strong interest in the C# community for this. And there's a lot of really sharp people that are coming up with tools. So I recommend this site, and it is called AwesomeBlazer. And AwesomeBlazer has a ridiculous amount of stuff here. It has all sorts of links to documentation. It has really cool demos that you can look at and see like how fast stuff goes. It has project templates, extensions. Notice that they have the Signal R extension now. That was just released. And going down a bit further, they have a bunch of third-party libraries that people are starting to create. The one that I think is significant right now is, where did it go? It's the one that does Bootstrap. Blazor Strap. There you go. Okay. Yes. So that one, and that's a popular UI CSS framework, but that makes it and wraps all the CSS into nice C# objects, so you can style your stuff. And there's some great videos here too. So, anyways, that's what I would recommend. Is if you want to just do a bunch of reading, go to this site, read a lot of his links, and you'll be up to speed on this in no time. So any questions? Okay, at this time, make sure you have all your code requirements installed. I'm going to disconnect, and Chris will come up and get you started typing.
First of all, I guess we can test the mic. 1, 2, 3, 4.
Good.
Let's plug it in. Or I'll be sorry later. And now now we just need to get with my luck, yeah, of course it'll be on this side. It's amazing how I know that this inanimate object, the ports do not change sides, but yet they still seem to manage to. Okay. All right. So getting started here. Oh, that was the other thing that. Okay. There are a just absolute ton of great links out there, and we'll make sure that you have access to all of them. But Bill showed a lot of them. There's a pretty recent video here from Steve Sanderson where he does a really great video, really great introduction. Oh, look, I searched it twice.
Yeah, that just 2 or 3 months ago.
Yeah, it's pretty recent. One thing about this is if you search for this, you're gonna find like the same video over and over, but there's like these massive changes because this this framework, this experimental project has gone through earth-shaking changes. So I know we've all got enough chat apps. You know, we don't need another one. But a lot of folks who do open source use a Slack-like, IRC-ish-like, Discord-ish-like chat app called Gitter, which is, generally speaking, they're one-to-one with repositories, and you will find all the major players working on Blazor, talking about Blazor, asking how to get things done here on Gitter. So definitely make sure you head there too. And then I want to just thank everybody who's joining us live. We've got 26 viewers on Mixer, and I know there's some watching us on the YouTube channel too. So getting started here. Here's our HandsOn Lab. I want to make sure that we have access to this. Oh, look, of course that it's the opposite way of reality. So everyone has had access to this GitHub site. This is our GitHub page, Philly.net's official GitHub repos at Philly.net. We've gone ahead and done the restructuring of the HandsOn Labs. So now HandsOn Labs are ordered in folders by year and then by month. And I don't guarantee that this will last forever because maybe we'll find out that this is too hard to navigate or something. But we're going to give it a try. The idea being that if you just showed up at our HandsOn Lab site, you'll be able to go through the directory. You could watch replays. And we're trying to work really hard to make sure that this content it's here in these 4 walls, and then because this used to happen to me. This happens to me anytime I go to presentations and demos and stuff. I go home and I say, man, I don't really remember how we did that. I really wish I could do it again. And so I feel like this is a great way for you to do things again. So anybody who wants to work on this tonight, there are some prereqs, and we're going to use Visual Studio. Actually, I'm going to open another instance of Visual Studio. We're going to use Visual Studio for these labs. I think, you know, Bill, myself, Rob, everyone who's done them, we really like using Visual Studio Code because it just means folks can show up, maybe grab an extension, do something at the command line, and go. And that's a real good experience compared to, I think, I remember the days here where we would say, okay, everybody, we're going to get started, open Visual Studio, and I would be sitting in the back, and I would actually see people like trying to install Visual Studio Express as fast as they could, or get an extension going or something. So, but in this case, the team working on Blazor is focused right now on a good Windows developer Visual Studio experience with all the bells and whistles we're used to, including things like debugging and Intellisense. And it's not there yet. That's why this is, as noted, an experimental project, not ready for production. It's not even called an alpha. You can expect that this project will change significantly. I think you can bet that APIs and things you use tonight will be different. But I think what you can see is the concept, which is a framework inspired by today's component-based frameworks like React, Vue, and Angular, that lives entirely in .NET languages that folks in this room know and love, but yet executes on the client side, or with recent announcements, executes many other ways, including possibly in the future on mobile, maybe also doing server-side rendering techniques, which are popular today in frameworks like React and Angular, saying, you know, I got all this work to get going client-side, but now let me see if I can take some load off the client side and do some pre-rendering. So we're constantly fighting the battle of, well, maybe we can take a little bit load off on the side that's getting bogged down. But for now, this is the magic of your C# code running client side. So our prerequisites, as Bill said, I tried to stress this as much as I could because this is so confusing, that if you have a .NET Core SDK, meaning you went to your command line and you typed .NET -- version, and you get something like, let's just say 2.1.200, it's real easy to say, oh, I have .NET Core 2.1, and you don't. The SDK for .NET Core 2.1 started at 2.1.300. So I'm sorry, and that's horrible and awful, and it should hopefully, quote unquote, never happen again with the new numbering system that now starts at 2.1.300. So, but it shouldn't happen again. That's the idea. Make sure you've got, if you're actually going to production with this stuff, make sure you're on 2.1.302 because there were some security fixes. And that's the end of that PSA. And then the Blazor language services extension from Microsoft is going to let you get some nice Intellisense, which works and doesn't. Like, I mean, I just want to warn you that I'm going to hope for some really great Intellisense, and then maybe sometimes it'll take a while for the system to catch up. It is all experimental, but you know, I'm sure there are people in here who might think that way about normal Intellisense too. So I love Intellisense, but you know, there's always the time when you really, really need it, and it's not working, right? Okay, so what I'm going to do is I do want to show everybody though that if you continue to scroll, you will see that the lab is now all here, and we're going to try to do as much as we can. And it's always hard to figure out if there's too much or too little, and will we be out of here squeezing it in at 8 o'clock or grabbing pizza at 7. We'll see. So, first of all, what I do not believe I have done on this machine, I don't believe I have, is run this .NET new command, which will install the Blazor templates. So how's the font size on our command line there? If anybody's got trouble with it, raise your hand. I can make it a little bigger. Might be okay online too. So I don't believe I've run this, so I'm going to do that. And what that did is it now allows me to say .NET new, and I can -- help it, and I get this nice list of everything that is supported by .NET new, including the 4 new templates, Blazor, which we're going to concentrate on tonight, the server-side, the new server-side stuff that was just released the other day for experimentation, Blazor hosted. What's the difference between standalone and hosted? Standalone, you can truly take the files from your standalone project and you can put them in a CDN or some other kind of static solution. There's some instructions on the Blazor.net site about hosting it in GitHub Pages. And end of story, that's it. It's purely client, 100% pure, that's it. If you go with this solution, Blazor hosted, which you'll see in Visual Studio in just a second, what they do is they combine it with an ASP.NET server and give you a web API. So now you're kind of getting the whole end-to-end thing going, where you've got your client and you've got your web API, and then the architect in you might say, hey, I want to split these up anyway, but it's not a bad thing to do to learn, to have it just all in one place, hit F5, it just works. And it's Blazor server-side that is the new one Bill was talking about. Blazor lib, Blazor libraries are the concept that we have in .NET today, that maybe I don't want all my code to be in my project, in my same one single solution or project. I want to have libraries. Maybe I want to create NuGet packages, which we saw a couple of. So you can start by doing a .NET new Blazor. That will work. That will get you going, especially if you're here tonight in Visual Studio Code. But what I'm going to do is follow along just like we've got here in the README. I'm going to take that away now. So anybody who needs the README, wants to follow along, it's at our GitHub site for this month's Hands-On Lab. You can follow along right there, and believe me, they're great Cliff Notes too. So how would we start? We would file new project in Visual Studio. How many people like the dark theme for presentations? Okay, what about for work every day? Like, yeah. I'm the same way. I use the dark theme at work, but I got some advice sometime. It was actually from an optometrist that it said that white backgrounds are easier to see not just on displays, but from a distance, and it's better for everybody's eyes in the audience.
Especially if they have fluorescent lighting. These are fancy LEDs, but
So it was just some advice I got. So I try to stick with it, even though I'm going to go back to this machine tomorrow and go, who set it to light? What's wrong with them? And I go, oh, that's right, it was me. So in our sample, we called the app First Blazor app. You should be able to call it whatever you want. I think without a whole lot of repercussions, there may be some namespacing issues, and if I catch them, I'll catch them. But I named it First Blazor app with a capital F, B, and A. And then we want, oh, these did not show up in here. I wonder if I have to, let's do this again. Let's restart Visual Studio. I don't think I have to. Okay, I have to start the thing from command line. I guess I will. All these extensions better work though. Let's try that again. I want the Blazor options. I wonder if I need to have 302. Oh boy, that would be really good. Okay. First Blazor app. No. All right. Well, no, I didn't actually want to make anything.
works at the command line.
All right. So what we're going to do is we're going to close this. I wonder if that means the extension is not loading correctly right now. That would be pretty cool.
Try doing it at the command line.
Yeah, that's what I'm going to do. I just want to close the solution. Let's get this out of here. I just want to kill this folder, and we'll go to command line and back off one. Do .NET new first Blazor
-O.
app, and
Dash. It should be
comes first.
It's Blazor -O first Blazor app.
All right, so I'm picking the Blazor template by saying .NET new Blazor. That's this list right here. And then -O is saying, hey, I want you to make a subfolder and put it there. If you don't do -O, it'll make the project. It's just going to make it right here.
Oops.
Some people, it's preference.
So what's the standard Blazor app, not the Blazor ASP.NET Core hosted or the server-side hosted?
Yes, I'm trying to make the regular Blazor app, which if we look at the screenshots here, it is this one.
Got it.
All right, so let's call that the one. Is that the one problem? Wouldn't that be nice? Of course, that doesn't give me a solution file, but that's okay. That's okay. Maybe it's a good thing I didn't try to do the other types. But let's see. Okay, so what have I got? I have got a solution that might look an awful lot like Razor Pages to you if you've been following .NET Core. It might even look a little bit like ASP.NET Web Pages. And just because, especially because of the first issue we had, I'm going to go ahead and run this thing. Now, when you run it from IIS Express, you pushing the play button in Visual Studio or hitting F5, you're going to get the standard Visual Studio procedure of an IIS Express site being made for you at some port that I can't necessarily predict for you, but it'll probably be in the 50 or 60 thousands. And if you do this on Visual Studio Code, one of the things that I have run into, and I certainly, anybody who sees something different online, oh, look at this, I said 50 or 60,000 and today I get 19,994. You're not going to be able to use, at least I could not get working and could not find any evidence that this works, debugging from Visual Studio Code, hitting the green arrow or running or using the built-in launch.json or task.json stuff. So instead, out at command line.net run, and it does fire up, and it fires up on port 5000 for non-HTTPS. So here's what our little app looks like, a little scaffolded app that's ready to go with 3 tabs. And what I want to do is I happen to be in Firefox, but this you should be able to do this in any. Where's my? Oh, here we go. In any browser, you should be able to bring up the developer tools. What I'm going to do is I'm going to open Network, and then I'm going to hit Reload. And this is the part where we all get amazed, right? Because we say, what came down some stuff we're used to, some CSSs, some JavaScript files. That's all reasonable. But then, wow, we got this WebAssembly file, and then we got this DLL. I mean, these actual, honest to goodness, .NET DLLs that came down, and even a PDP. Like, it's crazy. This came out to 1.81 megs, which is certainly a lot for Hello World. In fact, it may be about 80, 60, 70% of the original Doom on shareware. So that's where we've come to today. That's progress in software. But what I will say is that you watch any video about this, and they're going to tell you, this comes from Steve, the video I showed you from NDC, or even yesterday's community stand-up, is one of the goals is drastically shrink this. Remember, experimental, it's not even an alpha. But here's the cool part, right? Here's the network list, and watch what happens when I change pages. Now, if this were an MVC app, and I changed pages and caused a page refresh, I could expect that back in my developer console, I would see some more network traffic, and there's nothing. I'm going to see what I can do about showing both things at once here. This is the nothing up my sleeves part. I can click this click me, and it's all happening client side. I can go back to home. I can go back to counter. Now, some of you might say, wait a second, when you went to fetch data and made a request, that's true, because in this sample app, there is a JSON file sitting right there in your project that it just does an HTTP get on right in your local web server, your IIS Express server. So it's simulating an AJAX request, that's all. But everything else is happening without any kind of page refresh, all client side. And furthermore, and this is the part which I think, I mean, it's possible some of you will break into applause, we can search this entire project and we will find not a single JS file, right? There's nothing. Not even in the www root section.
What did I hear though? Was that applause?
Yeah, we've got our Bootstrap, we've got our CSS,
Okay.
and that's it, right? That's it. So that's crazy. That's crazy, but it is what it is. So now let's for us to get started and actually do something, what we will do is we're going to talk a little bit about these components, and what we'll do is we're going to start by making a component. Now, just like in React or Angular Review, the idea is everything is a component, including these pages. These pages are also components. What does that mean? That means components can be routed to be pages. Now, that sounds like really basic, but what hopefully we get to by the end of this is actually making components that aren't part of any page. So the first thing we're going to do is these pages that it starts with are kind of boring. So we're going to create a new page. And what we're going to make is like a team roster. It's just going to show a bunch of team members. So the way that you can do that is you can either just create a roster.cs HTML file. if you're in Visual Studio, there's no real tooling for this, but you could say add new item, and you could pick the Razor view, and that this isn't so bad because it basically just gives you a CSHTML file and it goes away. It's not going to give you that code behind that a Razor page does, and that'll never really work right, and you won't be happy, and you'll want to throw things. So we're really just looking for a blank file, roster.cshtml, and if you're in Visual Studio Code, you should be able to see that just fine. All right, so let's take a look here. So everybody's got our blank page up, and I have some stuff to type in. We're going to be doing a lot of cutting and pasting. We're going to try to do as much typing as we can, but there are some places where it's really heavy. But I am going to try and take advantage of muscle memory here and say, let's type this first part. So you start off a page in Blazor, a component that's going to serve as a page and get routed as a page by using the page directive, which is just this. It's just this @ lowercase page. And then what do you want to respond to it? And I'm going to want the web server to send roster over here.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
Can you comment on these pages, and how so?
I'm sorry, say that again?
Comment. How do you add comments? I'm going to throw some notes into my code.
So it is a CSHTML page, so we can comment here, but we can't do it till the function section.
Okay.
Now, hold on just a second.
Yep.
Because I think this is the commenting syntax for Razor. Yeah, it's the @ and a star. That was a great question. I didn't even consider it. So Razor has a commenting syntax that looks like this.
Right.
I think that's question of the night so far.
Yeah, well, it's the first question of the night, right? I think. So thank you very much. That's good. Didn't even consider that idea. So I got lucky here that I could Control Z back to this, because otherwise I would have said, I don't know. But no, that's great. So first we're going to have a page directive. And then we're going to say, this is dependency injection in Blazor. Yeah, Blazor, Razor, dependency injection, .NET Core. Let's keep going. Okay. So what does this mean? This means that I want, later when I write C# code, I want injected into this page a system.net.http client, which, oh, I wish that would have showed up. What is wrong with my extension? That does not make me happy. Okay, so we just got this. Which one am I doing here, Mike? Did I go too far? Nope. Okay, good. Because I was going to say, if I messed up here, and everybody's jumping ahead in the lab. All right. So what is going on now? Well, if you've had any familiarity with MVC or with Razor pages, Razor is a syntax that has nothing to do with Blazor, and it is a way to mix markup with C#. And you use that @ to signal to the compiler, I'm switching to C# now. Now, it's a little weird because now, as you can see, I'm just switching back. And what happens is the Razor compiler is smart enough to say, well, I can tell that you're not writing C# code anymore. But it gets weird because then, see, I can just go back to doing else. And again, it's smart enough to recognize it. So what am I doing here? I'm saying if a variable that we haven't even created yet called roster is null, then we're going to create a little bit of markup that shows some loading in italics. But if that same variable has data in it, then we're just going to show what it is. And I'm going to use the HTML pre markup just to make it easy. So now in Razor, we have after we write our markup, including our Razor syntax, we are going to create a function section. This is where we write our standalone C# code for this page or for any component. And since I need to make sure that that roster thing actually works, I'm going to say string.roster. And that's it. Now what's going on? What are you complaining about? Nothing? I really wish that all this worked. Would that be nice? Maybe I wish it would work after I built it. Is it not working on the other pages? No, see? No. No Blazor support for me tonight. Really? Is anybody else getting Intellisense here? Let me see. Install.
Too fast.
Did it not install? Was it a joke? Was it a ruse? What? I already said that I wanted this. Okay. If you'll give me just a second, let's give this a try. Sorry about this, because it's not like I didn't try this all week. So we have a lot of friends online on Mixer tonight. We see Andy's on, Mark Ziss is on. They're regulars here. But that's the power of this, right? We've got 27 people just on Mixer. I'm not sure how many we have on YouTube. And I'm glad that we're doing some YouTube streaming too, because some folks have mentioned, hey, I might be at work. And no, I don't want the preview. And at least they're still able to join us, which is really cool. So let's do this again. Recent, are you recent or no? Okay. C, source, Blazor, be installed and work everything. That would be really cool. Take your time, that's good too. Okay. Letting all that load in. I'm gonna go ahead and build it. Succeeded, no squigglies, that would be nice. Maybe it's still, now look at this, look at that. What a bummer. All right. Hopefully though, everything should still work though, even though I'm not gonna be able to show you the Intellisense, which just stinks. Okay, so we haven't done a whole lot yet. All we did was add a page by using the this page roster directive. We have said that we want queries or any requests that go to /roster. We want them to be directed to our team roster page, right? And we see the loading code that we wrote, the markup that we wrote, which makes sense because we wrote in our code, if roster is null, then show this, and we didn't assign anything to this string, so it's doing its job. But what's kind of weird is, especially if you're a web developer or even an MVC developer, is you're probably wondering is how does this ever get kicked in, right? So that's what we're going to work on now. Is we've already done the dependency injection, which basically is saying, when we want to now have the capability to use an HTTP client instance here in this page, and we're going to call that instance HTTP. That's just, it's like newing it up, but we're getting it by dependency injection. So in order to do anything, in order to take any action, we need to invite ourselves into the Blazor lifecycle. And we're going to do that by overriding a method called onInitSync. Init-async, I mean, I don't want it to be synchronous. So the Blazor framework is async aware. And wow, I'm not gonna get any help all night from indentation or anything. So we're gonna override this method, which normally just doesn't do a whole lot. And when does this method fire? It fires when Blazor loads this component or page. Okay, so this would be a good time for us to go and get the roster. And we're going to do that. The reason why I chose the asynchronous version of this method is we're going to make a call using HTTP client, and that API is asynchronous. So I'm going to use the getString async API, and I'm going to cheat and cut and paste, but I'll leave it up on screen for those of you that are following along. We're going to go out to a real live actual API that's online called randomuser.me. And the link, HTTPS, randomuser.me, you got to give them a /API, and I want to get 10 results back. If I just called this, it works, and I get back this fictitious person and a bunch of information on them. But I really want to get 10 because I'm creating a roster, right? So this saved me from having to write a web API of my own that was a bunch of fake data, or maybe go find something else. And to be honest, I think it was a great way to explore this because there's really a lot of stuff I got to do with data binding and deserialization here. So I'm going to wait here a little bit. If you're on the GitHub README, you should be able to just cut and paste this in. And what I'm doing is I'm loading in the string result value, which is going to be a bunch of JSON, into roster. And if those of you, some of you have already gone ahead and compiled and built and run this, you should be seeing that we no longer get the JSON, the loading screen. It just sits on loading. But when the loading is done, it actually switches over to the else block, and we see the markup that we put there. Now, of course, because we haven't hooked anything up to routing yet, I actually have to go and I have to punch in roster, and there it is. That is the JSON that came back from that service. So we'll go look at the code, and I'm actually going to do one thing. I'm going to close this. We'll look at the code, let everybody catch up. This is for fun. This is just for fun. If I put in like a 10-second delay before I run it again. So how does this work? Well, remember, this is from our conceptual point of view as a developer. The code comes in, says, well, is roster null? Yeah, it is. So let me display this markup. Paragraph tag, little loading thing. But you know, if it's not, then we'll run this markup. And after an on init async is done, it runs the Razor code again. Yeah.
You don't have it up on the screen.
Oh, I don't have the Visual Studio stuff up on the screen?
You have the Visual Studio. You don't have the website.
Oh, no, I don't have the website. No, I'm looking at the code. We'll go back to the website in a second. But this is just how the code is thinking. Once roster gets filled with data and this Razor is executed again, this time it's going to drop into the else block. I'm going to run this again. All I did was the equivalent of an asynchronous sleep. And the only purpose for this is just so you can watch that loading thing sits up there a little bit longer, and then we'll move on to the next piece of this. But hey, we're getting JSON back, and it really wasn't that hard, right? I mean, it might, for some of you, you might find it easier or harder than a fetch request or a XML HTTP request or whatever you use. Something built into React or Angular or whatever. So the asynchronous delay is going on right now. It hasn't even made the call yet. It's going to be 10 seconds. It's like it's forever. This is terrible TV. It would be even worse radio. But there it is. The JSON is there.
Need to stop debugging.
Now, what do we do next? Okay, so I've gotten back a bunch of JSON. All right. Now I got to parse it. And isn't that fun? I don't care what language you're in. To break apart a JSON structure, maybe it's a bunch of arrays. I don't care if you're in JavaScript. You know, you can use JSON.NET. It's wonderful. But what's really nice is if we can get some friendly model binding. So what I'm going to do is we should be able to switch the type that we're going to get back from our call from string to a homemade type that we're going to create in just a second called user response. Okay, this is our type. Now, from this point, I really recommend you cut and paste from our GitHub README because I made the smallest amount of code I possibly could here, and it was still several classes. So I am taking advantage of a deserialization feature in the method that we're going to switch to. That takes JSON and maps it to your own .NET classes, to your own C#, right? Which is really cool. So we're going to get this response back, and if you were examining the response, you will see that it had in it a result array, and then it also actually had another little data structure called an info, and I left it out.
So this is inside your functions tag.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. Let's take a look. So inside functions, right after onInit async, I've got CSharp classes to serialize JSON.
Okay.
This is the overall response, but in order to break down each result, I only wanted 4 values from there. So guess what? I only put in 4 values. That's what's cool about this library, this extension method we're going to use. I didn't have to fill the whole thing out. Because if you go dig into that JSON, there's a ton of data in there. I only wanted the first and last name. I didn't care about title. I didn't care about middle name. And then they had a picture structure, but all I really wanted out of there was the URL to the thumbnail. That's all I wanted. That's it. So these all get copied right into the function section. We'll worry about code cleanup a little bit later.
So there.
But I can't use the same method anymore. Yep. I can't use getStringAsync. I can use an extension method that ships with Blazor called getJSONAsync, and it's a generic method, and it takes the type that you want. Wow, that's some great. So those of you that have the Blazor language extensions working, this should be a much nicer experience. You should be getting Intellisense on this. You should be able to hover over getJSONAsync and see that it's an extension method. So this is an extension method on HTTP client that they're shipping with Blazor. You're going to love this so much that you're going to go ask the .NET Core team to put it into HTTP client proper, or go steal it for yourself. It's based on a library that I think I think that they took from the open source community called Simple JSON. I'll be honest though, that's about as much research I did into it. I should have done more. I hope the right people should get the right credit. But in any case, you use this extension method. So that's the next thing, is you change the call. Okay, now all in one, that call is going to grab the JSON from the endpoint. It's going to deserialize it using the classes we've provided. And it even can do the nested classes stuff, right? I'm telling it I'm getting a user response, and it does the rest. And we're going to await on it. And the magic of async await, we're going to get back a roster, which is actually a user response, not like a task or something else. Now, there's more we got to do, because our else block is expecting a string. And we are now going to do more than just give it a string. We're going to get an array of results. Those results each represent a person. And, oh, wait a second. Did everything just light up like right now? Or am I, no. I was going to say, you know what, it's because I'm back in the markup. That's why. I'm back in the CSHTML. So that part of the editing experience is working for me. In any case, what I'm going to do now, and I copied this code out of the GitHub, is we say we're going to go over the results array that came to us from the user response. Boy, this all got messed up. All of it got messed up.
What the hell?
So what I'll show you is you should be able to type result dot, and you should be able to dot into each of the data members in the data structure. That should be working for you. That's really frustrating. Sorry. I don't even think it installed again. Yeah, I don't think it did. Okay. Try and figure that out later. So is everybody caught up to this part? Everybody was able to cut and paste in. What you do is the for each part.
Totally forgot to cut and paste. Oh.
It goes between it's our else bracket now.
Human code.
I'll tell you, I'm about to head over to Visual Studio Code, although you don't get any Intellisense help there.
You
You're not getting any now.
I know.
It's
It's not that different.
fun to watch, though. Yeah.
you don't get a right squiggly.
I'm not, but I'm still disappointed because, I mean, everything works, right?
Yeah.
But it's kind of nice to see all of it. All right, so build and run. And let's take a look at this markup while it's loading up. I did a couple things here, right? I used Razor to say, I want to enumerate, I want to go over, iterate over the returned values, the results that I had called roster, and the results array inside that. I want to pull out the first and last name, put a comma between them, and then there's markup in there. There's HTML markup just sitting right there. The email is there, and I'm going to use an image tag and just plop in that thumbnail URL. Just plop that right in. And again, we haven't done any routing yet, which we're going to do in a little bit. Type roster, and here it is. Here's our roster of people. We've already gone ahead and converted that image thumbnail to real image tag. Now, you know, this is cool, right? We haven't set up any navigation yet, though. And so it's going to get tiring after a while of typing, of coming in here and having to hit that slash over and over and over. So let's set up the navigation. So in your default project, how do you set up navigation? You go in your solution to the shared folder and open nav menu. Now, I will take an aside and just talk a little bit about how this really works is if you make, this is a special page called view imports, okay, _view imports. It's a special page. If you come into view imports and you say @layout and you tell it a specific layout, every page is going to get that layout. And here it is, main layout. So that's how every page gets the sidebar from Bootstrap, and it gets the same heading, and the same about tab, and then the body just gets plopped in wherever you say @body. Okay, so your default project is already going to have this wired up, but you can use this technique yourself. There's a whole section on layouts in the documentation. You're going to find it familiar if you've done some MVC work or if you've done Razor Pages type work. It's going to be familiar to you. How does this whole thing get started? Well, we have something called an app.cshtml, which is going to go away, but it sets up the router. The router is just a component. For those of you who have your Intellisense working, when you hover over that word router, you're going to see that it is just a Blazor component. That's it, just like all the rest. And it's a great component, but all it really does is listen to the navigation and say, oh, this is the component that you want me to be showing now, to blow up, render, do all of the page lifecycle, and plop it right where you see the layout says to put it in that @body thing. Now this is going to go away. They would like for that to be wired up in startup. So if those of you who are used to .NET Core and ASP.NET Core, this should look familiar to you. You've got just your regular old program file that creates a website, and we have some special Blazor commands. Use Blazor startup, which is pretty cool. And then we've got just a plain old startup, but add component app to the app div. This is familiar, right? You Angular and React and Vue guys, right? And gals and developers of all stripes. You have to tell it which div to wire things up to. So where is that happening? Go seek out your www root folder and open index.html, and we have finally found it. That's the secret sauce. And then there's some other secret sauce going on. But you don't have to touch any of this. You can just start writing components, right? That's all you have to do. So, simple routing. For simple routing, I'd asked you to open in shared, open nav menu. You should be able to see what's going on here. You know, once you do one of these, you're going to say, oh, I see what's going on. This is Bootstrap code. This is not Blazor, but this is Blazor, the nav link component. It's a component that the router, it basically expands this out so that both it and the router work together. It's going to control navigation. We're going to be able to add navigation to our menu. So let's do that now. You can cut and paste one of these if you want, which I think I will do. You can also, it's been supplied there in GitHub, but let's just cut and paste one. So I've got two that say fetch data, which doesn't hurt anything. But if I change the reference for this second one to be roster, that means I want you to go to /roster. And then, well, we've got to change the actual markup. And I'm going to say team roster. This can be anything you want. It really doesn't matter. You've added a fourth nav item using the nav link. Boy, did I do that?
You erased your
Did I
close
accidentally
tag.
do that? Yep. Using the nav link component built into Blazor. Wait, you can't say any of this stuff 3 times fast. And the routing component is going to take care of the rest. That's really all I have to do.
You unerased it. You forgot to change the name.
Ah, I did. Well, then we'll have a second one, and I'll change it when we get back. But thank you.
You're welcome.
So as was pointed out, when I hit Control C to undo, that I've now got a fetch data, and you can even see it in the lower left there. It's really small, pointing to fetch data and then roster. This one I got to go change it to be team roster, but for right now I'm just going to leave it, and it goes over to the team roster. So it's doing what we want. Everything's working, all client side. We still haven't written any JavaScript, but you may have noticed that every time you execute this roster, whether you do it with that refresh like I just did, or whether I just go back and forth, I get a different roster. Now, that's because I'm using this random component. And I could leave it at that, and we could all accept it and be fine with it. But it turns out I thought this was a great opportunity to demonstrate some other Blazor features. So we are actually going to fix that. So first off, we will change this to say team roster and save it. Okay, that was my mistake from last time. And what we're going to do is we are going to go back to our roster CSHTML file. We talked about how the page directive controls the routing. Well, you can add a second page directive, which I'm going to do right now. And what's even cooler is you can add parameters right here using a brace syntax. Let's say team. So using this syntax, what I have now told Blazor, the router, is when requests come for /roster or roster with an additional parameter, I want this page to take control. And then what I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have to accept this parameter. I'm going to have to do something with it. Well, that means I probably need it in my code somewhere. So if I scroll down to the functions section, and it probably doesn't matter exactly where this is because it is C#, but it's kind of nice to keep everything together. If I create a field here in functions using the parameter attribute, and this field can be private, so I'm going to say private string team, and it's just an auto-implemented property. That's all it is. We're going to use a new feature, a newish feature in C# 7 timeframe, and we are going to put a default value in here. Now, I'm going to copy this one out of our GitHub repo, but frankly, you could run the API a few times and get your own seeds. So what happens is the API has a concept called seed, and if you deliver the same seed for an API result you got before, then it says, okay, fine, you can have that one over and over and over. So it is good for testing things like parsing and stuff like that. And again, that's a horrible thing to have to type in. So I really hope that, that you don't have to. I had thought a lot about like two things. I was thinking about providing a file or even trying to translate it some other way. And it just ended up adding code that wasn't really Blazor code. So I went with this. What I do have to do is I have to modify this, boy, this is awful. I have to modify the query string that I'm going to send, and I have to give it the seed value. So you say ampersand to add onto a query string. You add the parameter, which is just seed, but I'm going to use C#'s string interpolation. As you can see, I've already used it because there's a $sign in front of this quote. This is another newish feature in the C# 7 timeframe that I just love. And if I do braces once again, and I put in the actual variable that I want, and you're going to get Intellisense for this if you've got the Blazor core language stuff. This is way better than format string. This is way better than anything else we've had, better than plus signs, right? You can put expressions in there. So this is not a Blazor thing, by the way. String interpolation is C# 7. If you can't use this at work, find a way to get to C# 7 for string interpolation. That's awesome. Okay, let me think. We still have, do we have anything else to do? I guess that technically we don't. Technically we don't, because what have I done here? I said that if we've called roster without a parameter, what have we done? I'm looking for an extra parameter in the URL, but if it's not supplied, we've set a default. So that way, folks who still hit that original team roster link get something. But what I wanted to do, what I kind of wanted to do, is I wanted to make some teams. So you should be able to blow away your code. You should be able to add 3 nav links, and it doesn't have to be 3. If you get tired and you only want to do 1 or 2, that's fine. But I had created 3 teams. And again, this is all in cut and pastable if you don't want to type it in. But I'm going to go ahead and show you like that I don't have to change the nav link here except for adding on to the URL. And I am going to cut and paste in these horrible seed values. The only thing I'm really doing here, the only purpose for this was, in a way, it's letting me show you passing parameters, right? That's the real trick here. This is showing you passing parameters. It's showing you more routing stuff, more navigation. I don't want to get too hung up on the whole query string seed stuff. That's not really the point. It's about you can now create APIs. You could pass parameters to those APIs, and then you can retrieve them right in your component and do something useful with them. That's what that's really about. Okay? So, how are we doing?
Hold on.
Yep, that's fine. I'm going to run it and come back to it because it takes me a little while to build. So now I've done that, back to the code. Just leave the code there. It pops up on my second screen anyway. A lot of you probably noticed that it didn't do what we set out to do. And that was good. It lets me show you part of the Blazor page lifecycle. So it turns out to be very useful that this didn't work.
Okay.
Didn't work.
It didn't do what we expected. Let's put it that way. What I set out to do.
Sort of works.
And I'll bring the code back up in a second. But what am I talking about? Well, if I click on badgers, I'm going to go to a link that's sitting there at the bottom, which has the seed embedded in the URL. It gets picked up by Blazor because we set that parameter in the page directive, and we created a parameter in the function section to retrieve it. And I get this team roster with Jaden Wang and Valentine at the top. So you would expect that I should be able to go over to the aardvarks and get a new what? Wait a second. The URL changed. The URL's changing. And nothing's happening. Nothing at all. But it's not broken, not entirely, because if I do a page refresh, well, I get Catalina again, who leads just the team roster. And let me try the aardvarks refresh. Okay, there's Cecil. And if I do the badgers refresh, we should have Valentine at the top again, right? Okay, so it works, but I got to do a page refresh. So what happened there? So I think what you probably can guess is, do we need this? Do we need the nav menu still up on screen? Anybody? Okay, and if you didn't get all 3, it's fine. 2 is good enough to show the problem here. What happened is, on init async only fired once. And I kind of hinted at this. I said it, I probably snuck it in there, snuck it by you when I said, what does on init async do? It is a function that runs the first time Blazor loads a component and gets it ready to go. But it's not running it every time. So there are actually more methods in the lifecycle. And when I stumbled upon this and figured out how to fix it, I was actually going to take all of this out. All of the, like, oh, the whole roster thing is stupid. But I kind of realized, oh, wait a second. This gets to show you can at least understand there is a Blazor lifecycle with more methods, and we're going to create another one. So we're going to create a method called, well, we're going to override. I don't want to say that we created it. We're going to override a method called onParameters, plural, set async. And again, it is an asynchronous method, so that's why I'm using the async keyword. It should be highlighted correctly in your Visual Studio. I'm returning a task, so this is what we call void async method. Doesn't return anything, at least as far as we're concerned. You know, it would be, if we wrote this synchronously, it would just return. It wouldn't return any values. But this method gets called every time either the Blazor router or the Blazor engine or whatever sets the parameters for your component. In this case, we're using the component as a page. And when we start changing around the URLs and routing, those parameters are going to get set. This is going to get fired. All you have to do is cut and paste. All you have to do. Deal with this nonsense.
Cut and paste from the on init async. Is that what
You can cut and paste from on init async. That same
just the call?
call works fine. I'm even actually going to just go ahead and get rid of on init async. You don't have to. Nothing.
That one gets called the first time.
It gets called the first time because parameters are set,
Yeah.
even if there's no parameters. So,
But the on parameter set async is specific to Blazor.
yes, this is specific to the Blazor
Blazor
page
and copy.
lifecycle, just like on init async is part of the Blazor page lifecycle.
This is very Angular.
Oh yeah, no doubt, right? Very much inspired by Angular React View. Good observation. So when I click on the team roster, Catalina's in charge, but when I switch, on parameter set async fired, and Cecil is in charge of the aardvarks, and Valentine in charge of the badgers, and we haven't even looked at the fourth line yet. To be honest, there's our checking line. Right.
Just a sort of a general question. Why does the team roster stay highlighted?
Why does it stay? Oh,
Then once you build it.
I'll figure that out.
okay. So what I actually think here is I think that this just shows that my grasp of Bootstrap is not very good. That's my guess here. Actually, no, look at that.
It's something to do with the routing, but I'm
I
not
still
sure.
think it has to do with routing and probably the page still being roster, and I'm probably confusing the routing component.
You probably have to make the match exact, and I don't know how you do that.
Yeah, I'm probably... Yeah, you're right. See, as soon as I switch off,
I like when people are nitpicky.
it catches it up.
We'll put them in.
No, this is
QA.
good. This is good. Hopefully, the purpose is served that we've got on parameter set async. There's more than one method in the lifecycle. And when you go to blazor.net, look up that page lifecycle. There really aren't that many methods. If I remember correctly, there's only about 4 or 5 right now. But see, that could change. And the lifecycle could get expanded.
When you go back to the roster page, the page doesn't, people don't redraw. And you go to aardvarks and then roster.
It's just highlighting the wrong one on the menu.
Is it not?
Yeah, it's not.
Forget the highlighting. It's not.
You know-
You've got events firing.
Well, it's funny, right? Because
Well, no, that makes sense because there's no parameter on that route.
Right.
The slash route roster is
On
the route.
parameters set.
The digits after that are the parameter. If it doesn't have a parameter, it's not going to fire that async.
here's another thing that may not be happening.
Yeah.
This auto-implemented property was probably only set the first time through, right?
That's what you want.
It's what I wanted, except that, to your point, I'm using this as a jury-rigged way to go back and forth between 4 fictional teams. Now, the reality is, you know, that team roster tab should probably just go away. It doesn't make any sense anymore. But I'm not trying to cover for it. You're right. In fact, and these are good little observations to be making, is I think if I have to guess what's probably happening is when I head back up to team roster, it's saying, well, there aren't any parameters. And second, even if there were, they're already set. And this code isn't taking effect anymore. Like the page has already been, it's already going. The class is already instantiated. This little bit of code was to show you that you can put default values for parameters in Blazor so that if they don't get put on your route, you can add them yourself. As you can see, my little example here is not foolproof, right? But no, these are good. This is good. And as you
But these kinds of challenges are exactly what you run into when you get into more advanced Angular routing and React routing.
Right. Right. Yep.
All right.
So some of you folks may look at this and first of all say, poor Chris can't get his Blazor extensions working. But second, you might say, you know, this is once again stuffing all the logic, all the business code here in the view, right? And oh, I don't want to do that. That's ridiculous. Besides, forget that I think it's a bad practice. What if I've already got a bunch of business logic? I've already got business models that I could reuse here. Maybe I might have to do a little bit of work to write my own little mapper to deserialize JSON to this. But the point is I could get there and then I could take advantage of all the work we've done. This is silly. You can't tell me this is the only way you can live. And no, it's not. We will do a little bit of removing this code from here and putting it where you might think it belongs, but honestly, don't take where I put things as like architecture guidance. This is just to show you can get it out of here. You can start refactoring to models and get away from putting all this stuff in your view again. So the way you would do that, one way to do it, is we could come up to our project and we could just create a models folder. And oh boy, you know it really stinks to have a mouse that rolls down. Can I change the name of this, or is that not a thing? That's not a thing in Visual Studio, is it?
Yeah, you can.
Okay. Oh, you know why? Watch, and I bet you it's because the solution.
I think it's great.
So I wanted to call this models. And all I want to do is just make a plain old C# class. So I can even say add class. And now it'll just be a little bit of a shortcut. It's not the biggest shortcut in the world. And I'm going to call this user models.
So you're adding this to model.
Yep, I'm adding it to the models folder.
Oh, you created a new folder.
If you didn't create this folder, this is where the namespacing stuff gets interesting, right? So I'll tell you now, if you have some problems, it'll be because you didn't name your project exactly the same or whatever. So by putting it in a models folder, you're going to see that by default, Visual Studio namespaces it first Blazor app, the name of the project, .models. You could obliterate that right now and change it to anything you want. It's not a big deal. But in this case, that's what's going to determine our using statement a little bit later, where we import this, so to speak, back into our view. And what I want you to do is I want you to get the models. If you don't get them from the GitHub page, you can cut and paste them out of your C# code. So I guess theoretically, like I'm going to just grab the 3 model classes from the GitHub README. But if that, if you don't have that, you could grab them out of the class. Now I made a choice here. Again, you could probably in a few minutes do this differently. You'll notice user response doesn't come along, but result, name, and picture did, and right. If you're expecting me to provide some justification, I can tell you I probably spent about 45 seconds on that decision. It was really, can I move? I'm not even sure it was that long. Can I move these classes out? That was the goal. Can I move the classes out? Yep, I can. That's cool. Okay. You know, that'll make people hate it less. So user response got left here, but user models, you could imagine maybe these were your business models or something. And then if you've ever done some data contract stuff in various frameworks, you might annotate them. Maybe maybe they're EF classes or something. So the problem now is that roster, after you've created this file, roster has no idea what those are anymore, which you would know if you had the Blazor extensions working. So you have to basically tell it. You have to use, you know, we're all familiar with using statements, so you use a using statement. And this is where the namespacing stuff comes into play, because it actually goes and seeks out your file, which is pretty cool. But you gotta tell it. So you say, in my case, it's first Blazor app.models, which, yay, thanks Intellisense for that one, because that was a CSharp file. And that worked. And then I love what it's telling me. It's like, but you're not using it anywhere. You should not be seeing this because you are using it. You're using it down here. So that's it. I mean, obviously I didn't do much there, but you should be able to make that simple change of moving some classes out of view models. You might even be able to move all 4 of them out. I mean, it'll probably work. And that's the beginning of your refactoring to a cleaner design. I don't even think I really need to run it. Like, we didn't change anything, right? So this is a client-side framework, right? But so far to this point, I'm not sure we've done a whole lot that's that different from, say, an MVC application. Even in your typical MVC application, you could have a sidebar, you could build it in Bootstrap, and you could even, when the user clicks back and forth, if you really, really wanted to, you could write some JavaScript. But even if you didn't, a simple website that's just displaying some static data or mostly static data, or maybe it's going to a database or something, it's going to be so quick that, like, no value add yet, right? No value add, at least I think minimal value add. So, well, why do we say, well, I gotta have some JavaScript? Why does your boss come in and say, we gotta have a JavaScript framework? And well, one reason is because you say, we're gonna have a little bit more of an interactive design. We're going to allow people to select members of the team, members of the roster, and maybe in the real world, we'll put them in like a batting order and you'll be able to order them and all kinds of awesome drag and drop. But, you know, we've only got 35 minutes left. So what we want to do is we want to respond to your clicking on an image. Now, traditionally, that means JavaScript, right? End of story. There goes C#. All right, it's time to sigh and head over to the JavaScript browser and the Google developer tools and hit F12 all the time, and it's just over, and now I don't want to do this anymore. You know, that's definitely how some people feel. So we are going to add some interactivity, and what we're going to do is right after this heading, right after this H1 team roster, we are going to demonstrate how quickly you can get started with interactivity by just first dropping in a little bit of code here that doesn't exactly do what we want, but we can concentrate on the click first. Okay, so again, on the GitHub page, the code is there under adding interactivity. It says add some razor markup right after team roster. And what we're basically doing is we're saying if a certain variable that we haven't declared yet is null or empty, if it's not null or empty, then we want to add a little markup. And we're not actually going to go make the list yet, but what we are going to do is we're just going to throw out the value of that variable. And because we're going to throw this variable away later, I had a little fun with it. I called it say what. So all right, so up at the top, above where the roster is going to be displayed, we're going to create this new area with a selected teammates heading, and we're going to just regurgitate out whatever goes into that value. So now the question is I had told you that I want this to work when someone clicks on the image. Well, Some of us might be old enough to remember the way we did this in JavaScript prior to the unobtrusive JavaScript days.
Click.
We said on click, and guess what? It is back.
Nice.
Now, my interface went ahead and put in quotes. You're not going to need them. You will not need those quotes. Instead, you will use Razor syntax, and you will put the name of a function to be written called select user. That function is not written yet. It will be written shortly. Guess where we're going to write it?
Right below.
We're going to write it down in functions. So where do we do that? Well, with somewhere in here, we are going to need that variable. You're probably getting used to this now. If I refer to it up in the markup, I actually have to declare it down here. You know what's really happening behind the scenes here is this page is getting compiled into a class, right? Really super secretly. And then somewhere in here, it doesn't have to be where I put it. Honestly, CSharp's resilient. I'm just going to create this method. I don't even care about its accessibility because we're going to throw this away. Well, actually, I think we might keep the method. And all we're going to do, we're not going to do anything more than just go ahead and fill in that string value with something, anything. So what's happening here? When you come into the page, the string is set to null because it's just private string. Say what? It's nothing, hasn't been allocated. It might even be empty. It doesn't really matter. So don't ask me that on the whiteboard quiz. But what we have done is we have said when somebody clicks on a picture, run select user. Select user is some code down in the function section, which is just going to change the value of that variable. And way up at the top, we said, hey, when you're running through this markup to figure out what to do when variables change, run this code. String is no longer null or empty. So let's go ahead and display this. If you haven't already done this, this is just to show you this is the basics, beginning of interactivity, and then we'll actually do something a little bit more valuable. Because you may already start to have questions about this interactivity. I know I did. So you can see what my question was because it's the next heading in the file. Oh, wow. Look at this. This may have corrupted the target process. Well, that is wonderful. Running now? Yes, it is. And if I go to a roster and I bring up a roster and I click here, no, but I click on an image. We triggered it. We clicked on an image, that code ran. Simple code right now that basically, from our perspective, it made some DOM appear, which is actually what it did. So very React-like, very Vue-like, very Angular-like, very jQuery-like. Hooray! We don't have to use any of those acronyms anymore, terms. All right. So not super useful. Like there isn't a whole lot great about that. What can we do next? Well, if you want to do something useful, eventually what you're going to say to yourself, because this is what I said, is, well, that's great that I call a method that takes no parameters. That's kind of silly. Not only do I want to pass a parameter to this, I think it would be great if I could pass one of these parameters that I'm using right in the evaluation right here, maybe something out of result. And actually, that's where I started. I said, well, let me pass like a string or something. And I said, no, I want to see it take my whole custom complex type. I don't want it to be some intrinsic type like string. Let's see if it takes the whole thing. Well, it turns out what the magic is you can either pass in a value here, like a function. Well, actually, what you're really doing is you're passing a function. So if I can pass a function, doesn't that mean I can pass a lambda expression? Which that term lambda confused the heck out of me for a long time until I finally got this Zen state where I just realized all a lambda is a function with really brief syntax. That's all it is I'm just writing a void function, a function that returns void. That's what the parentheses, not the ones that are in yellow, the parentheses with nothing in them, not passing, not returning any parameters, but I am going to pass my function select user, and why don't I just send that result back in? And this is really cool when you think about it. I'm client-side code, but I'm writing it now that somehow magically is going to get evaluated, and when it is iterating over the results array, I'm going to say, now hold on a second, pass me back one of those results so that I can operate on it. That's all I've done here. Is I've said it before, I said call select user. Now I'm saying, well, call select user, but I've got here's a Lambda expression. Call this. Just call this function. Execute this. And it's a function that takes nothing and then calls select user result. That's what that Lambda does. It takes no parameters because I don't have anything to care about, but I want it to, the actual code is call select user result. We could expand that out. So that means now I need to change this. Now our function is going to take a parameter, which I call team member. And then I need to do something. Well, I'm going to do something similar to what we did before. So I'm going to need a list. So I don't really need this say what thing anymore either. We are going to keep a list of these results. We're just going to hang on to them. And
He's trying to do so.
well, I'm telling you, now I actually have more appreciation for those Blazor language extensions because at least this kind of nonsense doesn't happen. And for some reason, they're just not installing into this Visual Studio.
Your extensions in the taskbar, the extensions installer is still open. Maybe it didn't complete.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, right there.
Oh, thank you.
Yep.
Oh, look at that! It didn't even do anything. Oh, you might have saved the day. You might have saved the day. So we'll take a quick break.
So
You couldn't run it because your Visual Studio was open.
Well, yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
installing. Well, of course
You know what? Have a free water.
Hopefully you got something to eat earlier on Bills and Philly.net.
if you get a chance.
Yeah.
When you're running. Can you do it?
Okay. Oh, I know. Isn't
Yeah,
that
I think
amazing?
that's an important thing.
We'll do that when we come back up because I think this timing.
If we come back up.
Yeah. Right.
Okay, so what is this?
Oh, I didn't realize you were downloading it. All right. Okay.
Gotta pause this for you, Tim.
One more time.
Wouldn't this be great?
Close the studio and open it back up. Well, you already killed it.
These are the times when I say, yep.
I was there 2 days ago.
This
It's like
is,
Groundhog Day.
this is when I really do think I should get this blazing fast laptop, right? You can do it. Okay. Oh my gosh, look at all this. Syntax highlighting.
Wow.
Look at all that.
Wow. That looks
And
nice.
like I said, extension method, get JSON sync. Let's even
Only it
see
worked
what
dark.
happens if we format the code. Okay.
Useful.
It's not as great as I thought it would be. But yes, this is, I like this because you can see that we're importing system.net.http.http client. I think we should give this gentleman a hand. Thank you so much.
Good job, Tim.
Everything is great. We've got We've got our on-click highlights in purple to tell us. It even tells you what to do. Set the on-click variable to a string or a delegate value, and then it even tells you that your delegate's got to be of a certain type, which all sounds really confusing. So anyways, let's finish off what we're doing here, which is I've created a new list of results so that we can store the teammates that we click. And when we click, we're going to send in the teammate that we're in the middle. So basically, every time through, we're actually in Blazor speak. We are assigning an on-click attribute with a specific Lambda expression for that result. So it's, let's say there's 10 of them. That means there's 10 of those on-click handlers that we're not even going to see in the JavaScript. So,
What JavaScript?
well, right. Well, I'm sorry. We'll see. It's weird. I think it's weird when you look at it, when you expect, after doing web development for so long, and then you expect, it to be a certain way, and then you go look at the code, like you said, Rob.
So what did you say? Every time it's clicked, it's going to add a result item to the selected teammates list?
That's the plan.
Okay.
That's the plan. We haven't done that yet.
Okay.
I've made the list. So the first time you open a roster, the list is going to be there. There's probably all kinds of issues that I didn't really think through when I was testing this, having to do with switching tabs and stuff. But I don't want any of you to think those are Blazor issues. Those are lab issues. Those are trying to think of one step to the next, and let's not put too much code in between everything because we've only got 20 minutes left. So every time onClick gets called, we take whatever the result was as we were iterating through that got attached to that image element. So some function with that result got attached to the image element. We call select user. We add it to the current list of selected teammates. That list starts empty. And then let's see. Wow, we got to change this now. Okay. Well, this is a little bit more code than I think I want to write, but we'll talk about it. So you can paste in this check, which says, now, if there are any selected teammates, then let's go ahead and put that H3 header out there with selected teammates. And then let's create an unordered list, and we'll iterate through those teammates. And as we do, we'll create list items, and we'll just take the last names, and that's it. Simple, straightforward. Iterate over them. I mean, I could obviously do more. I could instead fill a really nice floating column to the right and like stack them with their pictures, maybe make their pictures nice and big and their names nice and bold. And that's all the kind of stuff that we can do, right? After we do the lab. Wow, this is amazing. It actually works. All you got to do is install it. All you have to do is install it. And they really work. So that's why ASP.NET team, you should keep working on the extensions. They're great. They make the experience better than not having them. Okay.
Duplication.
Now, let's click on the aardvarks. Here's our team roster. I can click, 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 and click, click, and click, but then I click on an image, and we take her last name, add her to the list. Let's go add Upton Camp to the list, and Lopez to the list. And there it is. This is all happening for us on the client. Well, so what does this look like? If we go to the debugger, and we, let's see, open the code. Okay.
Now everybody should step through this. This is a critical piece here to actually see
I've got
what's into your browser.
Mono.js, which has been minified all to heck. The WebAssembly, which obviously isn't helpful. The Blazor WebAssembly.js, which is sort of like it's a bootstrapping mechanism, right? But here's index.html. That's what was loaded. By now, though, if we went to the inspector, we would see that our page doesn't look like that anymore. By now, we've got, in fact, let's use this thing. Let's see, what is...
Yeah, go down and find that list of selected teammates.
So here it is. Here's the list.
Okay.
And then we come back. and we are building.
Go add a teammate.
We're building in the DOM. We're building an unordered, just like I said, build an unordered list with list items. Let me get this off to the side and get this off to the side.
And then go click on Run User.
Let's click on this one, and it just gets out.
And that just makes an LI tag.
And this is happening in the WebAssembly. There's in JavaScript making this happen, right? Well, I think it's really even a longer train than that, right? The WebAssembly is mono. What's really happening is it's executing our .NET DLLs, which we looked at earlier in the network tab. So that code is actually manipulating the DOM, and it's using the WebAssembly sandbox tools that it has to manipulate the DOM, which essentially, I think it's fair to say in a nutshell that part of a WebAssembly is whatever JavaScript can do, WebAssembly can do, no more, no less.
Yes.
That's for sure. But even just the fact that it can do it,
yes,
that's like that's the abstract goal.
And where it's going to make a big difference is when you're doing like lists of hundreds or thousands.
Sure. Yeah.
That's where the performance should really kick in.
All right. So a couple things though, and I think we might hit just okay on time here. This is not going to take the place of a comprehensive talk on components. We could have done a whole talk just on Blazor components. You could do the same thing with React components or Angular components. Forget the framework. You would say to everybody, this is a 300 level talk. You've already got to know React. You've already got to know Blazor or whatever. But one thing you may have noticed is that we haven't built any components. If anything, we just kind of built a page, right? Is this Razor Pages? Is this MVC? View? I mean, I thought you said this was about components. So it is. And what we're going to do is we're going to create our first component. And one thing before we leave is I want to show you where you can find a great sample that kind of like, it's way better than this one, but what it does is it ends up showing you all of Blazor's features. So you might just get a recap here, and then I'll say, okay, definitely make sure you check out some of these other samples. So I'm going to make a components folder, and then I will use Visual Studio's settings to create a Razor view. You don't have to create a Razor view because really it doesn't provide a whole lot of value. Honestly, the only value it gets me is I get the CSHTML. I could have just created a text file. And I'm going to call it a heading component, okay? And then, of course, I don't need any of this. So it created, I'll show you what it did, created a file in Solution Explorer. It's under the components folder. It's the heading component. You see that I moved it around. You're going to see that Blazor seeks it out, so that's cool. And there's really not going to be a whole lot to this one, okay? First thing you'll notice is no page directive. Why no page directive? This component's only intended to live, it's going to be consumed by pages. You could do this with your page-based components too. In fact, what a really good Blazor page looks like is it has a lot less of that code you see and a whole lot of, when you see us build the component and that purple tag is in there, you'll see a lot of those stacked up. With what you will see though is Razor code maybe looping around items for lists or making decisions on which components to send to what or what values to send into it. So far, all you've really seen is you've seen the CSharp and Razor taking the place of JavaScript and the DOM. That's what you've seen so far tonight. So this heading component, the markup, pretty simple. It's an H3 header, and we're going to pass it 3 parameters. We're going to say, here you go, H3 header. We're going to give you, look, old school style sheet, right? Old school style setting. We're going to do it right in the element. I'm sure people are screaming. And we're going to set the font style, the font family, and we're going to put the content where it's going to be something you can pass in. Somebody asked online, if you've missed the beginning, is this going to be on YouTube? I believe the video ends up on YouTube even later tonight.
So it should be on there as soon as we
In
post.
fact, you can even go to YouTube right now, and I think you can even rewind it.
The DVR is enabled. Yes.
Yeah, I think you can even rewind it and start right now. And then what we do over the next couple of days, fix it up, and we add timing marks and stuff to help people out. But you can start watching it now, in fact. So what are we going to do? We're going to add a function section, and you're going to see this function section kind of all it does. I mean, it doesn't do a whole lot, right? All it does is say, okay, this function section is super simple. You can pass me a font style, you can pass me a font family, you can pass me some content. I'll use it, and if you don't pass me any, well, then this is what I'm going to use. That's it. This is a really simple component that I know it doesn't really do a whole lot for us, but let's try it out, right? Okay, so back in roster.cshtml, all you have to do is replace the markup that you have for your H1, and let's see if, is this going to come through, or I think I needed to build it first. Let me build it first, because the first time that this happened, I thought, wow, that is cool. So I build it. I think eventually, I'm sure they would love to do all the other stuff that a lot of
you don't have to
projects
do it using for a component?
No. Here's the interesting thing, right? What would you do using on? We don't have any clue right now. So clearly there's some form of Roslyn/reflection going on here. Because, is it going to come up? Come up? There it is. There it is. Oh, and then I blew it right away. So, can I pick it? Yes. And I can just close it. See how it's in purple? That's a clue. In the current ASP.NET Core time frame, that means like tag helpers, right? Or it means special versions of the.
So that's by convention that it's in the components folder?
No, I don't have to put it in there.
So it's just looking for everything you've got.
Yeah, I don't have to put it in components folder. Well, you can see what it compiled. If you look at the IntelliSense, it did compile. Heading component got compiled with that namespacing, like you just said. But I can move it. If I have a few minutes, I'll try to move it.
You don't have to. You're short on time, but.
Yep. So that works. Heading component works.
The reason I ask is in Angular, you have to go through a lot of ceremony.
Right.
To define components and say, I'm using this here.
Yep. So one thing that I've seen as this framework has matured, I'm not going to try and tell you I've kept up with it every single week, every single day, is removal of ceremony, As they've gone from 0.1 to 0.5, removal, and I think that's a big team goal, is removing ceremony. So because I did nothing, I'm using the default values for that component, so it's just delivering simple markup. The markup that I said, as the defaults, bold, sans serif, and selections. This is all markup now, nothing special. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how do you pass values to a component. And let's see if we can get Intellisense on this. All right. If I say font family, which is one of our components, the Intellisense pops up, and I'm going to make it italic so that it's different. If I say font style, the Intellisense pops up. That's pretty cool. And I'm going to change that to serif from its original sans serif. And I can even pass in the content. And I'm going to say, and that's going to change it. That's it. So that's like the beginning of components. Now, what we didn't get a chance to do is, for one thing, you could probably break this out, and you'd have a roster page component that brings the whole page together, like the Big Lebowski. It ties the whole page together. But then you might have a roster component that knows how to bring together roster items. That could even be another component, so that you could say, hey, roster items, I'm going to work real hard on the markup for the roster item. We'll have the headshot, we'll make the text bold, we'll capitalize first letters of names using the Latin alphabet. One of the things interesting about that API is it used all kinds of different alphabets, but it changed it, right? It changed it based on my selections here in the component. You can pass into this component. There's a value we didn't get to explore tonight called ref, where you basically pass in a component using an attribute, and then the component now could call methods and properties on what you passed in. It's a way for parent-child communication. That story is not fleshed out yet. So my opinion on things like ref and parent-child component communication is I see the team actively fleshing that out. And when you think about how some other frameworks do it, when I think about how I've seen React do it, you often pass like functions in. So basically the parent component will build the function and then say, okay, children, here's the function I want you to call. It actually calls back into me, and then I can manage the process. I sort of went down that path here. Something that I wasn't able to accomplish in time for the lab was I wanted to componentize this roster. And then I wanted this roster page management to pass in, well, here's how you find out what to do when a user has been selected. You, roster component, you're not going to know. I'm going to tell you what to do. Because maybe you delete that user. Maybe in some pages, you might add that user to a lineup. In other pages, you might cut them, right? In other pages, you might sign them to an extension or whatever. So you want that ability to pass in methods. And I'm not going to tell you that that doesn't work right now. I'm going to tell you that I got a little lost in documentation there. So that's the end of the GitHub Lab. There's obviously way more that we didn't get close to doing. So Bill talked about some of these, the official Blazor repo, ASP.NET Blazor. This is something you should check out, ASP.NET Samples, because in ASP.NET Samples, under ASP.NET Core, under Blazor is a flight finder app that's been updated to 0.4.0. For an interesting demo and what that app does, you watch Blazor, Steve Sanderson, NDC, those three things, make sure it's just from a month or so ago. He goes through the story of Blazor and what you can do with it. He's got a real nice slide here that I'd love to land on, that one. He goes through all of these things using the Flight Finder sample. Okay, so make sure you check out that sample. All you got to do is pull down the GitHub repo, open the solution, and this uses that ASP.NET Core server hosted model we were talking about, where you get 3 projects, a client server and a shared. We didn't do that tonight. The blog post about 0.5.0, so check out the ASP.NET blog. If you're familiar with the GitHub page that you used tonight, we will add all those links to the page. I just got to get home and get them pushed. Blazor 0.5.1 is what we used, and it talks about server-side Blazor and even begins to discuss you trying it out. Talks about how that all might go. You can go to blazor.net and follow a tutorial that we didn't copy tonight, Build Your First Blazor App, where you build like a to-do list. Kind of felt like I've seen that a lot lately, so I didn't want to do it again. I talked about the Gitter. If you have any questions, these are the people to ask. And I'd say if there's only one more thing, make sure that you try to watch the weekly ASP.NET community stand-up. Yesterday, the MVC team was on. They talked about Blazor a little bit.
Yeah, I watched
an earlier
all of these community stand-ups from about 6 weeks ago, and it was the Blazor team.
Yeah, June 12th.
Yeah.
This is great. You should watch this.
But the demos that Sanderson did on that were excellent. He showed how you can, instead of sending all the data back and forth in JSON, which we all know is sort of wordy, you can use a binary formatter, and you can actually send all the data, so it's really compressed.
So just a little inception-y. If you ever can't make it, join us on Mixer, mixer.com/philly.net. I saw that number hitting 23, 26, 27 tonight. That might be close to a record. With even the blockchain one, I know that thing hit 30 for a while. Tell your friends. We really want this content to live on outside the 4 walls of this room. And don't forget that if you ever want to watch anything again, we are at youtube.com.
Forever.
They are here forever and ever and ever.
Until Google fails.
And getting a lot of views, honestly. It's great. So, how many people got this all done? A lot of people? Good.
Well, not that end of the room, but apparently this end.
Good job.
So, since this this is an unusual piece of technology, and it was very new to all of you, I can tell. What do you think about this? Would you actually look at using this?
I would love to.
Okay, so anybody have any kind of project they think they'd like to use it for? What do you got, sir?
What we're building now.
what you're building out.
So I'm gonna, I'll just summarize it by saying a document management system.
Document management, okay. Anybody else? So there would be things you'd be working with PDFs and stuff like that, images.
You can pick up any public API and do something, you know.
Yes, and if you see some of these videos that Chris mentioned, Sanderson often shows how he grabs NuGet packages and does all sorts of interesting things. And the NuGet packages work on the server, on the client. That's what's that's
Two things we didn't get to do tonight. There's already a series of Blazor packages that then wrap JavaScript functionality like local storage. I feel like one that I'd like to actually write is the one for Moment.js because I use that library all the time. If you could wrap it as a Blazor package, that would make it translate it to
yeah, but with CSharp, we really need Moment.
Well, you got to get it out to JavaScript, right? Now, one thing I can tell you is
only if you're going to
I don't want to say get out to JavaScript. I said the one thing that Moment does well is the thing where I said that wrong, where you give it a time and it says 3 hours and 47 minutes ago. That's kind of cool. So you could write that in C# too, right? And then you don't need there is JavaScript interop, which we didn't do. Didn't even touch it, where you can basically say, hey, call this JavaScript method, and it'll do it. There's a lot.
Maybe like December, January, you'd want to do some more of this.
Yeah.
That's what I'm looking for, that kind of feedback.
Yeah.
So we could maybe do another month or two where we get into some of these more advanced. Like maybe January we could do server-side Blazor, and then do a session on interop. What's really going to make this take off? Chris mentioned there's a bunch of extensions and tools being written by third parties, and I brought up the one about Bootstrap, which is a very popular framework. If they take something like the Infragistics or Telerik, control sets and make them Blazor compatible, I think you're going to see this really take off because a lot of those things are really unwieldy to work with in JavaScript. And in the C# world, it's sort of common, you just create a couple types and pass the data. Graphs just happen.
Did you show where they can start?
Oh yeah. Am I still on the correct screen here?
Yeah.
So there are a lot of ways to cast your vote. One of them is to go to the ASP.NET Blazor repo and click star and click watch. And another way is to join in on these discussions and issues. That does mean test it out. Find things that don't work, come to the issues and say, hey, yes, this particular use case I really need, or it's broken for me in some way. They could definitely use that kind of input, but I think these are the simple numbers metrics. You get a bunch of stars, you get a bunch of watches, you get a bunch of forks. It at least shows people are excited. If you go to their home repo, just by comparison, you see how there's 6,000 stars here. On the ASP.NET home, it's almost caught up to the ASP.NET home repo's stars. Now that's just one metric. Another way is retweet out our videos, tell the ASP.NET team, either by way of issues or when you include it on Twitter, you @ASP.NET. Those things get picked up. They have automated metrics that are watching the tweets, they're watching the mentions. I think if they feel enough people are excited about it, and they can fit it in with the timelines because they've got .NET Core 3 to ship.
It did have a survey, but yes,
yes,
you checked it.
That's right. In the when you run this app, you probably did. You all see the survey?
Yep.
You can click on this, and you can go out to their website, and you can say, "What do you think?" Right?
I think we should stop.
So
it's 8:01.
It's 8:01, and we have a hard stop, as they say, in corporate America. So thanks for coming. In 2 weeks, Rich Ross will send us a topic description, and we will know what he's going to present.
Maybe.
But yeah, that should be a good meeting. So 2 weeks from tonight, in conjunction with the Philadelphia Azure group in these rooms.
You should too.
And then our lab next month,
Find yourself a
GitHubs.
and go see if you can get that.
Thank you both. Thanks.
Okay, please make sure all the chairs are pushed in, all the trash